Welcome to Conversations with the Smith Family. I'm Doug Taylor, the CEO of the Smith Family. Through these conversations, we look at work around Australia that's helping young people change their futures through the power of education. And today I'm joining you from Canberra in Parliament House, and I'm joined by the Honourable Dr. Andrew Leigh, the Assistant Minister for Competition, Charities, Treasury and Employment. And today we'll be talking about education, volunteering, philanthropy and a range of other issues. And welcome, Andrew. Andrew, I'm going to go off script with the first question I want to put to you. So father, keen marathon runner, economist, author, speaker, podcaster, as an observer of all those things that you do, I think the question a lot of people would want to ask is, how on earth do you do it? It is unbelievable to see the kind of the amount of output from your life. How do you do it?
Well, the first thing to say, Doug, is that I'm just incredibly lucky to represent a seat in the national capital. I do look at my colleagues who represent Western Australia and spend a lot more time on planes than I do, and think that it's very fortunate to be able to go home to your kids at the end of the day, not only for the time sense, but also because of how grounding it is. I'm very lucky to be married to Gwyneth, who's been incredibly supportive of my career. And probably also not to have a great taste for trash TV, which frees up a few hours in the day.
I'm sure it's a very generous response. I think it takes a lot of discipline as well, which no doubt is a feature of things. Andrew, you've had, as an academic, long involvement in education, and we're an education children's charity, of course, so we're really interested in people's education journeys. What would be your most memorable education moment? If you can reduce it to one, is there one that really jumps out at you?
I had a wonderful English teacher by the name of Judith Anderson, who was passionate about poetry and about Jane Austen. She was somebody who would read out passages with a great sense of energy and vigour, turn around our essays the next day covered in red pen, and who, if you wanted to do an extra essay and get feedback on that, was always happy to do it. She's somebody who shaped my writing, and whenever I write a book, I'll always put a copy in the mail to Judith with a little note in the front saying thank you to the woman who helped me learn how to write.
Oh, that's fantastic. As someone who's married to an English teacher, they would love to hear that story, as most teachers would, in terms of playing it back, because you don't see the impact and the benefit you create in that short time, do you? That's wonderful. Andrew, I've seen you talk about education as being like a torch. And it's a great metaphor for the power of education. And obviously we're in an incredible period of education reform, early years, primary, secondary, and the accord in university reform. So it's a terrific period of reform. We have particular interest in the National School Reform Agreement and what's going on at the moment with those negotiations. I'm interested in your reflections on where you think we're up to with those reforms. It's not your portfolio, I accept, but I know you have a keen interest in education reform. And, what's at stake at the moment in getting education right for our country?
We have some big challenges in education, as you know, Doug. If you look at the average scores of Australian students on the PISA tests, they're nearly a year behind where they were when we first started doing those tests a couple of decades ago. The NAPLAN scores haven't measurably increased, and the work that Chris Ryan and I did from the 1960s to the 1990s also showed a decline. So in that environment, we really need to do more to boost the scores of all students. And beyond that, we need to work to close the gaps. I know one of the great passions that Jason Clare has is about reducing gaps between kids from advantaged and disadvantaged households, ending the postcode lottery that can sometimes apply, encouraging more students who are the first in their family to attend university. That equity agenda is really fundamental to Labor, but it's also fundamental to a more productive economy, because ultimately, as technology advances, the best way to meet that is going to be with a greater quality and quantity of education. We've got to make sure not only that we're encouraging people to take on all the education that they'd like to do, but also that we've got great teachers in front of students and terrific teachers in front of the most disadvantaged students. At the moment, there's this perverse pattern where students will often start their careers teaching the most disadvantaged kids and finish them teaching the most advantaged kids. And that's the opposite to what a policy of equality of opportunity would lead you to want. So I know Jason Clare's passionately committed to getting those education funding deals right, and also getting the policies and programs in place that'll really deliver results.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic, and it's absolutely about the funding and getting it to where we need to in terms of all that work that Gonski did all those years ago, but also then using those funds for good evidence-based initiatives that will drive the sort of change and reduce that gap over time. No, you're exactly right. Music to our ears at the Smith family, of course. Andrew, you have an enduring passion in thinking about social capital and volunteering's place in contributing to social capital, and had the great privilege of studying with Robert Putnam, of course, and being an academic and doing research with him. Can you isolate that, where that personal interest comes from for you? Is it family history? Is it upbringing, or just a particular experience?
Yes, I'd always thought of community building as being something a bit separate to the social justice issues that I cared about. And that was until I took Robert Putnam's class, just around the time he'd brought out Bowling Alone. That persuaded me that the strength of community connection and the gap between rich and poor are interconnected. That a society that has more economic inequality is often a society that has less social connectivity. We've seen over time, both in Australia and the United States, those two trends becoming worse. Both our nations have become more unequal and less connected. So Australians are less likely to play an organised sport, to join a community group, to be part of a religious faith community, or to be members of a trade union than we were a generation ago. So I'm really passionate in my role as Assistant Minister for Charities, not just in getting charity regulation right, but building a more connected Australia. And we've got a target as a government to double philanthropy by 2030, including to great organisations like the Smith family. See how I got that plug in there for you?
Yeah, well done, thank you.
As a way of really building a more connected society, which is good for our economy, good for our health, but also good for our happiness, because a more connected society is the kind of society we all want to live in.
Absolutely. And thinking more about volunteering, and I've had the opportunity more recently to work with Volunteering Australia and chairing the National Volunteering Council, and part of that is really thinking about how we grow volunteering, make it more sustainable. So I'm interested in your insights there, Andrew, in terms of what you think we need to do differently in terms of volunteering of the future. Obviously, the way Australians live their lives is very different today, and we've seen a decline in participation rates of volunteering. So what do you think needs to change for the future?
We need to make volunteering easy. Episodic volunteering is often popular, which is why Clean Up Australia is the number one volunteer event. It has a simple ask, but there's also opportunities to ask people to volunteer through organisations such as Park Run, which is rapidly growing across our suburbs. 8 a.m. run, 5 kilometres every Saturday morning, and it's always free. It attracts lots of runners, but also lots of volunteers. We need to make sure people are asked. The number one reason people volunteer is someone asked them. I think the decline in attendance at religious services, the drop in church going and attendance at mosques and synagogues and the like, has meant that there's fewer opportunities for people to be asked to help out in their own community. So if you're a volunteer, take that opportunity to ask a friend if they'll come along and join you. If you'd like to be part of a volunteer organisation, those online engines, whether it's Go Volunteer or Seek Volunteer, really are very good right now in matching you up with a good volunteering opportunity.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Look, it's been wonderful to have you being responsible as a Minister for Charities amongst the many areas in which you have portfolio responsibility, and to articulately and passionately speak about the role of charities and not-for-profits in the Australian community. You would be aware of the Pay What It Takes report that's been out recently, looking at effective investment in not-for-profits and how that's not been at the right levels historically and how it needs to change into the future. One of the big investors in not-for-profits is obviously government, and thinking about their contributions to fund the things that are just necessary to create the sort of impact and change that's core to our work, but some of those core overhead essential backbone type costs. How do you think that will play out in terms of government investment being at the right level for not-for-profits into the future?
We know from the latest Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission report that about half the funding of the charity sector comes from government. And we said as an opposition before we came into government that we wanted to address those issues around indexation and around the duration of funding agreements. If you just give somebody a 6-month or 1-year funding agreement, basically they're going to use it in order to apply for the next grant, and that's no good for anyone. So Amanda Rishworth has been very clear about the importance of appropriate indexation of long-dated funding agreements. We've shown our willingness to back pay rises in the social and community sector because we recognise the importance of stable employment in that sector. We understand too that you want people to build up expertise in that in their careers. You want people to take on training, to see working in the not-for-profit sector as being something you do for a lifetime rather than just a few years. And funding's important to that.
Yeah, no, it's critical, and it's great to hear about that priority in government at the moment. It really is necessary to create sustainable organisations going forward. You mentioned before the great focus on trying to double philanthropy. That's a great agenda, and obviously we've had the Productivity Commission do the report. I think that report's now been shared with government, so I won't get you to speak to that until that's all public. But in that, what do you see as the kind of game-changing opportunities that will really drive the growth of philanthropy at the level that it could be, given the funds that are in the wider community?
Well, Doug, we've got the interim report out there from the Productivity
Yes.
Commission, and that makes very clear that the tax deductibility system is not the way you'd design it if you were starting from scratch today. We also have the discussion around ways in which we can make giving more of a mass participation activity and less of an elite sport. Yeah. One of the striking facts the last couple of decades, as you well know, is that the amount of dollars as a share of GDP has stayed constant, but the number of givers as a share of the population has fallen. And so as inequality has grown, it's become more of an elite activity. Something like workplace giving can make a difference there. Workplace giving programs are available to about half the workforce, but only used by about 1 in 50 employees. We need to focus on making it easy to give. We also need to get better evidence about effectiveness. So if you look in the US to something like Charity Navigator or GiveWell, they're very clear about the impact that a donor can receive. In Australia, we don't have quite as good measures of impact. And as somebody who's very keen on high quality evaluation in the government sector, I'm having a lot of conversations with people in the not-for-profit sector about doing more randomised trials to judge effectiveness. Paul Ramsay Foundation's just put out a really important grant program to fund up to $300,000 for 7 programs which will look at social impact. I think that's a terrific way of encouraging better measurement of outcomes, ensuring that the dollars are going further and making more of a difference in the lives of those we seek to help.
Yeah, you're right. There really is a strong relationship between growth in philanthropy and demonstration of outcomes. When I often talk to donors, I talk about treating their funds like an investment in our work and being accountable and transparent and showing progress given our mission and purpose as an organisation. So those things have a very close relationship. Andrew, if you think about your role again as Minister for Charities, and thinking about, that will come to an end at some point. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but what would you see as kind of a legacy, a contribution that you'd like to think about being able to make for your period of responsibility that would really have that kind of enduring benefit for charities, but more importantly for the Australian community?
I think the biggest thing, Doug, is resetting the relationship between the government and charities, getting that sense that government isn't working at loggerheads with charities, that we're not at war with the charity sector, but we're collaborating with charities. So that from that then flows the right personnel at the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. Sue Woodward has been a terrific head of the Charities Commission, and our new board, which is chaired by Sarah Davies, reflects the sector in being majority female and including called and First Nations representation. I'm also keen to see some of those trends start to turn around in donations, in volunteering, and in community engagement. They're hard things to shift. These are long-run social trends which have been going the wrong direction for a couple of decades. But if we're able to make a difference there, I think it will really tangibly improve the lives of many Australians. People with more friends tend to have better physical health and better mental health. They tend to have opportunities in the labour market. Often you'll find out about jobs through your networks, and it provides a source of joy in many lives. Do you want to live the kind of life where at the end people are giving a eulogy about what you gave back to your community, not simply the kind of life that's focused on accolades and awards and pay rises, but one which is a full life surrounded by others.
Thank you, Andrew. I was going to ask some questions, but I think we need to end on that positive note. It gives us a great kind of endpoint for a fantastic conversation. So, Andrew, thanks so much for your leadership and your contribution to the not-for-profit and charitable sector, and for continually advocating for greater levels of accountability through evaluation and all those other sort of supports that really build a strong Australian community. So thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks for the important work that you and the Smith family does. It's a remarkably important organisation, 102 years of contribution to the Australian society, and the nation is much enriched for that.
So thanks, Andrew, for this wonderful conversation today, and thanks to all of you for joining in on our conversations with the Smith family. If you'd like to hear more of these conversations, jump on to thesmithfamily.com.au.